The night my mother stood up at Christmas dinner and thanked my sister for carrying this family, I knew something was about to break. I was sitting 2 seats away from her hands, wrapped around a mug of lukewarm cider, listening to the clink of silverware and the forced cheer that always settled over our house every December. The tree lights flickered softly in the corner of the living room. Outside, snow dusted the sidewalks of our quiet neighborhood in suburban Ohio, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Inside, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. I was 31 years old that Christmas, old enough to know when a room is lying to you. My name is Allison Reed. At least that's the name on my driver's license, my mortgage papers, and the employee badge I wore every day at a pharmaceutical logistics company downtown. It's not the name my family seemed to associate with effort, sacrifice, or contribution. That role belonged to my younger sister, Megan. Megan sat across from me at the table, her blonde hair styled carefully, her sweater expensive in a way that looked effortless. She smiled politely as Mom spoke, nodding like someone accepting an award she believed she deserved. And of course, Mom continued, her voice warm and just a little too loud. We wouldn't be standing on such solid ground if it weren't for Megan's help this year. Covering so many expenses when things were tight. It means everything. My father raised his glass. To Megan, always stepping up. Everyone followed suit. Everyone except me. I didn't lift my glass because my hands had gone numb. Things were tight. That was new information to me. I had been quietly transferring money into my parents' account every month for nearly 2 years. Mortgage help, property taxes, utilities, repairs. I did it automatically, like paying a bill, never asking for thanks, never mentioning it at the table. My parents never talked about it either. They just accepted it, and now apparently credited someone else. I glanced at Megan. Our eyes met for half a second. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look confused. She looked relieved. The room hummed with conversation again, people eating, laughing, passing dishes. No one noticed that something fundamental had shifted inside me. Or maybe they did, and they chose not to look. I told myself to stay calm. This was Christmas. This was family. Making a scene would only make things worse. That was the story I had told myself my entire life. I grew up learning how to be the easy one, the capable one, the daughter who didn't need much. Megan had always been the dreamer, the one with big plans, big feelings, big needs. When she struggled, everyone adjusted. When I struggled, I adapted. It was easier that way, or so I thought. After dinner, while Mom served pie and Dad poured more wine, my uncle leaned toward me and said, "It's great that Megan's finally helping out. Must take a lot of pressure off you." The words landed like a slap. I smiled automatically. Yes, I said, it must. That night, after hugs and leftovers packed into containers, I drove back to my townhouse alone. The streets were quiet, decorated with lights and wreaths, families settling in for cozy evenings. I parked in my driveway and sat in the car longer than necessary, staring at the dark outline of my house. This place was mine. I had bought it 5 years earlier on a modest salary after years of saving and saying no to things other people didn't think twice about. It was the first thing I had ever owned outright. No help, no co-signers, no applause. I unlocked the door and stepped into the silence. It wrapped around me, heavy and honest. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. There it was. The monthly transfer, still scheduled, still active. A quiet line item that had never been acknowledged, never celebrated, never defended. I sat at my kitchen table and did the math for the first time in months. The total made my chest tighten. Enough to cover more than half the mortgage on my own place. Enough to make a difference. Enough to be noticed if anyone had been paying attention. I thought back to Mom's speech, to Dad's toast, to Megan's calm smile. A thought surfaced unsettling and persistent. What if they all knew? What if my silence wasn't kindness anymore but permission? I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake listening to the heater kick on and off, replaying moments I had brushed aside for years. Comments about how lucky I was to be so independent. Jokes about how Megan needed more support. The unspoken assumption that I would always be fine. By morning, something inside me had settled. Not anger, not yet. Clarity. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront Megan. I didn't send texts or demand explanations. I did something much simpler. I canceled the transfer. No announcement, no warning, just a quiet click and a confirmation message on my screen. I told myself I would wait, observe, see what happened when the invisible support disappeared. If my absence went unnoticed, that would tell me everything I needed to know. If it didn't, then things were about to get very uncomfortable. Either way, I was done pretending that being overlooked didn't hurt. As I sipped my coffee and watched the pale winter sunlight creep across my kitchen floor, I had no idea that within a few weeks my parents would be calling me in a panic. My sister would be rewriting history, and a secret tied to our family's finances would come into the open in a way none of them were prepared for. All I knew in that moment was this: they had finally shown me where I stood, and for the first time in my life I was ready to move. The first sign that something was wrong came 9 days later. It was a Tuesday morning, cold and gray, the kind of winter day where the sky feels permanently low. I was halfway through answering emails at work when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. I glanced down expecting a delivery notification or a calendar reminder. Instead, it was my mother. She never called during business hours unless something was wrong. I let it ring twice before answering, my chest tightening in a way I didn't fully understand yet. "Allison?" she said, skipping any greeting. Her voice was strained thin. "Are you busy?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm at work. What's going on?" There was a pause just long enough to tell me she was choosing her words carefully. "We got a notice from the bank this morning," she said. There seems to be a shortfall this month." I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the office fading into the background. "A shortfall," I repeated. "Yes," she said quickly. "It's probably just a timing issue or a mistake. The mortgage payment didn't go through completely and your father is very concerned." Of course he was. I pictured my father at the kitchen table, papers spread out, calculator tapping against the wood, his jaw set the way it always was when numbers didn't behave the way he expected them to. "I'm sure it can be sorted out," Mom continued, "but we wanted to check with you. You handle these things so well." There it was, the assumption, the unspoken expectation that I would fix it quietly, efficiently, without needing to be asked twice. I took a slow breath. "What exactly are you asking me, Mom?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well," she said, her voice softening, "we were wondering if you knew anything about why the transfer didn't go through." I looked at the spreadsheet open on my computer screen, rows of data blurring together. "I stopped it," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. "You stopped it," she repeated as if the words didn't quite register. "Yes," I said. "I canceled the automatic transfer." But she began, then stopped. "Why would you do that?" The question felt almost surreal, as if my money had become so integrated into their lives that its absence required justification. "I needed to reassess my finances," I said calmly. "I've been covering a lot of expenses for a long time." Mom exhaled sharply. "Allison, you know things have been difficult for us lately." "I do," I said. "That's why I helped." "You didn't say you were planning to stop," she said, a hint of reproach creeping into her tone. "You didn't say you were crediting Megan for it," I replied. That landed. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice sounded defensive. "Well, Megan has been helping too," she said. "She's been very supportive." "How?" I asked. She's been there," Mom said vaguely, "emotionally. And she's promised to step up more once things stabilize." I closed my eyes for a moment. "So she hasn't been contributing financially," I said. Mom sighed. "Allison, this isn't the time to compare. It never was. Comparison was only acceptable when it favored Megan." "I'm not comparing," I said. "I'm clarifying." Another silence. I could hear her shifting on the other end, the faint clatter of dishes in the background. "Your father is going to be very upset," she said finally. "I'm sure he will be," I replied. "He feels strongly about family pulling together." "Then he should talk to me," I said, "directly." "He's not ready for that," Mom said. "He feels blindsided." I almost laughed. Blindsided by the absence of something he had never acknowledged. "I have a meeting in 5 minutes," I said. "We can talk later." "Wait," she said quickly. "What are we supposed to do about the payment?" "That's for you and Dad to figure out," I said. "I'm not your emergency fund." The words felt heavy but right. I ended the call before she could respond. For the rest of the day, I felt strangely calm, focused, as if a low-grade anxiety I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally lifted. I finished my work, attended meetings, laughed at a coworker's joke about bad coffee. Life went on. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. That evening, my sister called. I stared at Megan's name on my phone, debating whether to answer. When I finally did, her voice was bright, almost too bright. "Hey," she said. "Mom mentioned there was some kind of mix-up with the bills." "Was that what she said?" I asked. "Well," Megan laughed lightly. "You know how she is, always worrying." "What do you want, Megan?" I asked. She hesitated. "I just wanted to check in. Dad's pretty stressed." "I'm aware." There was a pause. Then she lowered her voice. "Look, if this is about what Mom said at Christmas." "Is it?" I asked. Another pause. "I didn't know she was going to make such a big deal out of it," Megan said. "She just wanted to acknowledge me." "For what?" I asked. Megan sighed. "Why are you being like this?" That question. The one that always framed my discomfort as a personality flaw. "I'm being honest," I said. "Something you don't seem very comfortable with." "That's not fair," she snapped. "You've always acted like you're better than us because you're so independent." I felt a flicker of anger then, sharp and sudden. "I didn't choose independence," I said. "It was assigned to me." She scoffed. "You love playing the martyr. And you love taking credit," I replied. The line went quiet. "You know," she said finally, her tone cold now, "Dad always said this would happen, that once you got ahead, you'd forget where you came from." I laughed a short, humorless sound. "I remember exactly where I came from," I said. "That's the problem." We hung up shortly after, neither of us willing to say what we were really thinking. Over the next week, the calls escalated. My father left voicemails that were clipped and formal, asking me to reconsider my position. My mother sent texts heavy with guilt, reminding me of sacrifices they had made when I was young. Megan posted vague quotes on social media about family loyalty and betrayal. Still, no one asked me why I had been paying their bills in the first place. No one acknowledged the imbalance. Then one evening, as I was cooking dinner, my father finally called and spoke. "Your mother tells me you've decided to withdraw your support," he said without preamble. "Yes," I replied. "You've put us in a very difficult position," he said. "I was already in one," I said. "You just didn't see it." "You're being selfish," he snapped. "This family has always depended on cooperation." "No," I said quietly. "This family has depended on me not saying no." That stopped him. "You think this is about gratitude?" he said after a moment. "It's about order, about everyone knowing their place." I felt a chill run through me. "My place," I said, "is in my own life." "You've always been fine," he said sharply. "You don't need help the way Megan does." "There it is," I said. "That's the truth, isn't it?" Silence. "I didn't call to argue," he said finally. "I called to tell you that if you don't resume the transfers, there will be consequences." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm listening," I said. "You're forcing us to make some difficult decisions," he said. "About assets, about the future." I felt something click into place. "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I'm stating facts," he said. We ended the call soon after, both of us too controlled to raise our voices. I stood alone in my kitchen, the smell of garlic and onions filling the air, my dinner forgotten on the stove. For the first time, I understood something with complete clarity. This was never about money. It was about control. And whatever decision my father was about to make, I knew one thing for certain. He was underestimating me. Because unlike him, I had already learned how to survive without anyone's approval. And if he thought pressure would make me fall back into line, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The letter arrived on a Friday afternoon, slipped through the mail slot with a dull thud that echoed through my quiet house. I almost ignored it. I had just gotten home from work, shoes kicked off by the door jacket draped over the chair. The week had been long, heavy with tension that never quite erupted, but never eased either. I was halfway to the kitchen when I noticed the envelope on the floor. Cream-colored, thick, official. My name was typed, not handwritten. That was when my stomach dropped. I picked it up slowly, turning it over in my hands, as if weight alone could tell me what was inside. There was no return address I recognized, just the name of a law office printed neatly in the corner. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, took a long sip, then another. My heart was already racing, my body responding before my mind caught up. When I finally tore it open, the language inside was clean, precise, and devastating. It was a formal notice, a demand. My father was claiming that my withdrawal of financial support had caused material harm to the family and to my sister's future prospects. He was requesting compensation, not asking, requesting. As if this were a business dispute, not a family fracture. I sat down hard in the chair at the kitchen table, the paper shaking slightly in my hands. There it was in black and white. I had gone from daughter to liability. The accusations weren't emotional. That was the most chilling part. They were framed as facts. My independence was described as premature. My decision to stop paying their bills was characterized as disruptive. My house, the one thing I had built entirely on my own, was cited as evidence that I had moved out of sequence. Out of sequence. Like I had skipped a step in a process he believed he controlled. I read the letter 3 times each pass, making my chest tighter, my thoughts sharper. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't a guilt tactic. This was escalation. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. The kind that comes when a line is finally crossed so clearly there's no room left for doubt. I picked up my phone and called the first number that came to mind. Patrick Lawson answered on the second ring. "Allison," he said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" Patrick and I had gone to college together. He'd gone to law school. We'd stayed loosely in touch over the years, exchanging holiday messages, the occasional coffee when schedules aligned. He specialized in civil litigation now. No, I said, but I think I need you. I drove to his office that evening, the sky already dark traffic light. The building was quiet, most of the other offices empty for the weekend. Patrick met me at the door, concern etched across his face as soon as he saw the envelope in my hand. He didn't interrupt as I explained. He read the letter carefully, his expression tightening with each paragraph. "This is aggressive," he said finally. "That's one word for it," I replied. He leaned back in his chair. "He's framing this as a financial dispute, not a family issue." "That's deliberate," I figured, I said. "What does it mean?" "It means he's trying to establish leverage," Patrick said, "and intimidate you." I let out a slow breath. "Does he have a case?" Patrick shook his head. "Based on what you're telling me, no. Adult children are not legally obligated to subsidize their parents or siblings, and there's no concept of sequence in the law." "Then why do this?" I asked. Patrick looked at me carefully. "Because people who are used to control don't relinquish it quietly." That night I went home and slept like someone who had accepted a hard truth, poorly but without denial. By Monday, the family dynamic shifted again. My mother stopped calling. Not gradually, completely. No texts, no check-ins, just silence. Megan, on the other hand, became louder. She posted an article about family responsibility on social media, tagging vague phrases about sacrifice and loyalty. Friends of hers, people I barely knew, commented with supportive emojis and passive-aggressive remarks about entitlement. I didn't respond. Then came the call I didn't expect. It was from my Aunt Linda, my father's older sister. We'd never been particularly close, but she had always watched things more than she spoke. "Allison," she said quietly, "I heard what's happening." "Did you?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "and I want you to know something." I sat down slowly. "This isn't the first time your father has done something like this," she continued. My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "When we were younger, she said there was an argument over money between him and another family member. It ended badly." "How badly?" I asked. "Legal threats," she said. "Public fallout, people choosing sides. Your father doesn't see money as support. He sees it as structure." That word again. Structure. "He believes the family works best when someone is in charge," she added. "And when that order is challenged, he panics." I thanked her after we hung up, my mind racing. That evening, Patrick called with an update. "There's more," he said. I did some digging. My stomach tightened. "Your parents refinanced their house last year," he said. "Took out a sizable loan." I closed my eyes. "They used projected family contributions as part of their repayment plan," he continued. "Not legally binding, but optimistic." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning they counted on you," Patrick said, quietly, without telling you. Everything clicked. The Christmas speech, the panic when the transfer stopped, the sudden aggression. This wasn't about Megan's future. It was about a plan built on my silence. I spent that night going through my records. Bank statements, transfers, dates, amounts, every payment I had made over the past 2 years. I laid them out on my living room floor, the pattern undeniable. I wasn't a helper. I was a line item. The next day, Patrick sent a formal response to the letter rejecting the claims and requesting all future communication go through legal counsel. The reaction was immediate. My father called. I didn't answer. My mother texted accusing me of turning this into something ugly. Megan sent a long message about betrayal, about how I was tearing the family apart. I read it once, then deleted it. Because for the first time I saw the situation clearly. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing what I provided. And now that the truth was surfacing, there was no way to put it back. That night, as I stood in my living room surrounded by papers that told the story no one wanted acknowledged, I felt something new rise in my chest. Not fear, resolve. If my father wanted to make this a legal matter, then I would meet him there. And I would not be quiet about it, because the moment he decided to turn his authority into a weapon, he gave me something I had never had before. Permission to stop protecting him. And whatever came next, I knew this much. The version of our family built on my invisibility was already collapsing. They just hadn't realized it yet. The hearing was scheduled faster than I expected. Patrick warned me that once a formal claim is filed, momentum takes over. Deadlines appear, calendars fill. What had once been an emotional conflict now had structure, rules, and consequences. My father had wanted order. He was about to get it, just not the kind he understood. In the days leading up to the hearing, my house stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like a command center. My dining table disappeared under stacks of documents, bank statements sorted by month, emails printed and highlighted, notes from Patrick neatly labeled. Every piece of paper told a quiet story of consistency and self-reliance. I had worked since I was 16. Grocery stores, coffee shops, administrative roles. long hours that paid for tuition, rent, groceries. I could trace my independence year by year, paycheck by paycheck. At the time, it had felt lonely. Now it felt like evidence. Patrick called one evening while I was organizing a folder labeled Family Transfers. "There's something you should prepare for," he said. What I asked. "Your father's argument isn't really legal," he said. "It's philosophical. He's going to talk about fairness, family hierarchy, sacrifice." I leaned against the counter. "That sounds familiar." "It should," Patrick said. "But here's the thing. Judges don't rule on disappointment. They rule on facts." The morning of the hearing, I woke before my alarm. The sky outside was still dark, the house silent. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker off one by one. My hands were steady. That surprised me. At the courthouse, Patrick met me near the entrance. He looked calm, professional, reassuring in a way that made me feel grounded. My parents arrived together, my father walking slightly ahead, shoulders squared, jaw tight. My mother followed close behind, eyes downcast. Megan trailed them, her face pale expression unreadable. We sat on opposite sides of the room. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. No drama, no grandeur, just wood, muted colors, and a judge who looked like she had seen every version of family conflict imaginable. When my father spoke, his voice was confident, measured. He talked about family values, about how children should move forward together, about how my decision to buy a house and withdraw support had destabilized a carefully balanced system. He said words like responsibility and fairness, as if they were legal principles. He did not look at me once. When the judge asked him to clarify the legal basis of his claim, he hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then he leaned into the idea of moral obligation, tradition, expectations. The judge nodded politely. Then Patrick stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize anything. He laid out facts the way you lay bricks, methodical, unemotional. He presented my employment history, my financial records, proof that I had supported myself since my late teens, proof that I had voluntarily assisted my parents with no agreement, no obligation, no expectation of repayment or recognition. He then presented the transfers. The room felt different after that. My father shifted in his seat. Megan stared at the table. My mother clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. Patrick asked one simple question. "Were you aware that Allison had been contributing financially to the household for over 2 years?" My father hesitated again. "I assumed," he said. "You assumed," Patrick repeated calmly, "but you did not verify." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And were those contributions discussed or acknowledged?" she asked. "No," my father said. The silence that followed felt heavy. Patrick then addressed the refinancing, the loan, the projected contributions, the plan built without my knowledge. My father's face changed then, not anger, something closer to shock. "That wasn't meant to be permanent," he said quickly. "But it was counted on," the judge replied. She dismissed the claim without drama. No lecture, no spectacle. Just a clear statement that adult children are not assets and independence is not harm. We left the courtroom quietly. Outside, the cold air hit my face sharp and cleansing. Patrick squeezed my shoulder lightly. "You did well," he said. Across the steps, my parents stood frozen. Megan looked like she wanted to say something. My father stared straight ahead, his face rigid as if acknowledging me would fracture something he was desperately holding together. My mother approached slowly. "We just wanted things to be fair," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. "They were never fair," I said quietly. "They were just quiet." That was the last conversation we had for a while. The fallout was subtle but relentless. Extended family stopped reaching out. Invitations disappeared. Megan blocked me on social media. My father sent one final message accusing me of humiliation. I did not respond, because something had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. A week later, Patrick called again. "There's something else," he said. My stomach tightened. "What now?" "Your grandmother's estate," he said. "There's a trust clause your father may have overlooked." I closed my eyes slowly. "What kind of clause?" "The kind," Patrick said, "that activates when funds are misrepresented or diverted without disclosure." The pieces fell into place. The refinancing, the silence, the entitlement. My father hadn't just built a plan on my money. He had done it while managing assets that weren't entirely his. For the first time since Christmas, I smiled. Not out of satisfaction, out of recognition. He had always believed I was behind, out of order, out of place. What he never considered was that while he was busy managing appearances, I had been building something far more dangerous, a record. And if he wanted to talk about consequences, then the conversation was far from over. Because the truth has a way of surfacing when people mistake silence for consent. And my father had just made the biggest mistake of his life by assuming I would keep protecting him. I wouldn't. Not anymore. The trust meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Patrick explained it carefully, outlining the process the way he always did, stripping emotion from it until only facts remained. My grandmother's trust had been established years before her death, designed to protect certain assets from mismanagement. My father was listed as a fiduciary, not an owner. That distinction mattered more than he had ever acknowledged. He's required to disclose material financial decisions that could affect the trust, Patrick said, including refinancing tied to projected income streams. Income streams like me, I said. Patrick didn't correct me. I spent the days leading up to the meeting in a strange emotional limbo. The immediate fear was gone. The courtroom had stripped my father of the authority he believed he held. But what replaced fear wasn't joy. It was something quieter and heavier. Anticipation. I replayed memories I had ignored for years. Holidays where my grandmother pulled me aside and pressed money into my hand, whispering that independence was important. The way she had once asked casually if my parents ever leaned on me too much. I had laughed it off at the time, unwilling to see what she already understood. By Thursday morning, the sky was clear, painfully blue. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to feel steady. Neutral colors, clean lines, the armor of adulthood. The trust office was housed in an old brick building downtown, understated and dignified. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Patrick greeted me in the lobby, his expression unreadable but focused. "They don't know you're coming," he said quietly as we walked toward the conference room. I nodded, I figured. When we entered, the room was already occupied. My father sat at the long table, papers neatly stacked in front of him. 2 trustees flanked him, older men with careful eyes and the kind of posture that comes from decades of watching other people's money. My mother sat beside my father, hands folded, gaze fixed on the table. Megan was not there. My father looked up when the door opened. For a split second, his expression flickered. Surprise, irritation, something like disbelief. "Allison," he said, "this is a fiduciary meeting." "Yes," I replied, "that's why I'm here." Patrick took his seat beside me and placed a folder on the table. The lead trustee cleared his throat. "We've been reviewing some recent financial disclosures," he said. "There are inconsistencies that require clarification." My father straightened. "I've already provided documentation." "Yes," the trustee said calmly, "but not full disclosure." The word hung in the air. Patrick slid copies of bank records across the table. Transfers, dates, amounts, the quiet, repetitive evidence of my support. These funds, Patrick said evenly, were not disclosed as part of the refinancing projections, despite being listed as anticipated income. My father's jaw tightened. "They were temporary," he said, "family assistance." "That may be," the trustee replied, "but omission is not discretion." My mother finally looked up. Her eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. The second trustee spoke. "There's also concern about the assumption of continuation. Was consent obtained?" "No," Patrick said. "It was not." My father leaned forward. "This is being blown out of proportion." Respectfully, the first trustee said, "This is exactly the proportion we are required to address." I watched my father's composure crack just slightly. Not anger, panic, the realization that this room did not operate on his rules. The trustees spoke quietly between themselves, referencing clauses, fiduciary obligations, oversight triggers, language that didn't bend to authority or familiarity. Then the lead trustee looked directly at my father. "We are initiating a formal review," he said. "Until it is complete, certain controls will be reassigned." My father froze. "Reassigned?" "Yes," the trustee replied, "including decision-making authority." The silence that followed was profound. My father had spent his life believing control was permanent. That structure protected him. That authority was something you earned once and then kept. He was wrong. The meeting ended without confrontation. No raised voices, no accusations, just process. Outside, my mother caught up to me as Patrick stepped away to take a call. "Allison," she said softly, "you didn't have to do this." I turned to face her. "I didn't," I said. "He did." Her eyes filled with something that might have been regret, but I no longer felt obligated to interpret it generously. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's not for me to manage anymore," I replied. That afternoon, Megan finally called. Her voice was tight, controlled. "What did you do?" "I told the truth," I said. "You've put Dad under scrutiny," she snapped. "Do you know what that does to him?" I closed my eyes. "Do you know what he did to me?" "This wasn't supposed to involve the trust," she said. "That was private." "So was my money," I replied. She went quiet. "They're talking about oversight," she said finally, "about limits." I felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. "That's not my responsibility," I said. "Neither is fixing this." She exhaled sharply. "You've changed." Yes, I said, I have. We hung up without resolution. In the weeks that followed, the family narrative shifted again, this time not behind closed doors, but in subtle public ways. My father stepped back from certain roles voluntarily. The refinancing was restructured. Conversations grew quieter, more careful. No one apologized. They didn't have to, because something far more important had happened. The illusion was gone. I was no longer the invisible support system, no longer the backup plan, no longer the quiet solution to someone else's mismanagement. I had become visible, and visibility, I learned, is dangerous to people who depend on silence. One evening, sitting alone in my townhouse, I looked around the space I had built piece by piece, the walls I painted, the furniture I chose, the calm I had fought for. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something close to peace, not because justice had been served in some dramatic way, but because the power dynamic had shifted permanently. My father no longer decided what my life meant, and whatever consequences came next, I knew this. They would finally belong to the people who created them, not to me. Silence became the new language of my family. Not the peaceful kind, the strategic kind, the kind that stretches conversations thin and forces everyone to choose their words like they might explode if handled carelessly. Weeks passed after the trust meeting, and for the first time in my life, no one asked me for anything. No emergencies, no favors, no quiet expectations disguised as concern. My phone stayed eerily calm. At first it felt like relief. Then I understood what it really was: repositioning. At work, my life continued uninterrupted. Meetings, deadlines, small office jokes, the rhythm of a world where I was valued for what I did not, what I provided invisibly. That contrast made everything else sharper. One afternoon, Patrick called me into his office again. "They've retained separate counsel," he said, scanning an email on his screen. Who I asked, though, I already knew. "Your father and your mother," he added, jointly. I nodded slowly. "What are they claiming now?" "Nothing formal," he said. "Yet. But they're asking questions. About exposure. About reputational risk." "Reputational," I repeated. "Yes," Patrick said. "The trust review triggered internal flags. Not public, but documented." I leaned back in my chair. "So now they're worried about appearances." Patrick gave a faint smile. "People usually are once they lose control of the narrative." That night, my mother finally broke the silence. She called late after 9 when she knew I'd be home. Her voice sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard before, not anxious, worn down. "I don't recognize your father anymore," she said without preamble. I closed my eyes. "I think you do." She sighed. "He's been angry, defensive. He says everyone is against him. He's confusing accountability with betrayal," I replied. She was quiet for a moment. "You could help smooth this over." There it was. Even now, after everything, she was asking me to absorb the discomfort, to make it easier, to soften the consequences. "I'm done smoothing," I said gently. "I didn't cause this." "He feels humiliated," she said. "So did I replied. That was the first time I said it out loud. She didn't argue. Instead, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Did I fail you?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "You didn't protect me," I said, and that mattered. The line went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how," she said. "I know," I replied, "but now I do." We ended the call without resolution, but something had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't asking me to fix it. She was sitting with it. A few days later, Megan showed up at my door. No warning, no text, just a knock that echoed through my quiet house. I opened the door and found her standing there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes rimmed red. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked through my living room, slowly looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. The framed photos, the bookshelf, the calm, deliberate order of a life built intentionally. "This place," she said softly, "it's nice." "Thank you," I replied. She sat on the couch without being invited, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "They're blaming you," she said, "for everything." "I assumed they would," I said. She looked up at me, frustration flashing across her face. "You don't get it. Dad's spiraling. The trust review, the hearing the money. He says you embarrassed him." I told the truth, I said. "That's not embarrassment. That's exposure." She shook her head. "You could have talked to us first." "I tried," I replied. "For years. You just didn't hear me." Her shoulders slumped. For a moment, she looked less like the golden child and more like a woman who had been carrying someone else's expectations for too long. "They always told me you didn't need help," she said quietly, "that you were strong, capable." I nodded. "And you believed them?" "Yes," she said, "because it made sense. You never complained." I felt a familiar ache in my chest. "Silence isn't strength," I said. "It's survival." She looked at me, then really looked as if a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. They counted on you, she said slowly. Didn't they? Yes, I replied, without telling me. She swallowed hard. I didn't know, she said. Not all of it. I believe you, I said. But you benefited from it. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't ask for that. I know, I said, but you didn't question it either. The truth settled between us, heavy and undeniable. After she left, I sat alone on the couch replaying the conversation. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. This wasn't a simple villain story. It was a system. A structure that rewarded silence and punished independence unless it served the right person. The next escalation came quietly. Patrick forwarded me an email chain involving the trust's external auditors. The review had uncovered additional irregularities. Nothing illegal, but enough to warrant continued oversight. Enough to strip my father of unilateral control. He's lost authority, Patrick said when I called him. Completely. I stared out my window at the darkening sky. What happens now, I asked. He adjusts, Patrick said. Or he doesn't. But either way, this part is over. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in my kitchen listening to the quiet hum of my house. For years, I had believed peace came from keeping everyone comfortable. I was wrong. Peace came from boundaries, from letting consequences land where they belonged, from understanding that love without respect isn't love at all. It's control dressed up as concern. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I realized something that startled me. I wasn't afraid of what came next. For the first time, my life felt like it belonged entirely to me. And whatever storms were still brewing, I knew this much. I would not be the one absorbing them anymore. The invitation arrived by mail, not email. That alone told me it mattered. A thick envelope, heavy paper, my name written in my mother's careful handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter and let it sit there while I finished dinner-washed dishes and wiped down the stove. Old habits die hard. Delay before confrontation had once felt like control. Now it just felt unnecessary. When I finally opened it, the message inside was brief and deliberate. Family meeting, Sunday afternoon at the house. No apology, no explanation, just an expectation. I almost laughed. For a moment, I considered not going. I didn't owe them anything. I had said my piece. The system they built had already begun correcting itself without my participation. But something told me this wasn't about reconciliation. This was about one last attempt to reset the balance. So I went. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Same white siding, same trimmed hedges, same wreath on the door, though Christmas had long passed. My parents had always believed consistency was a virtue, evidence that nothing had gone wrong. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. My father sat at the dining table, papers neatly stacked in front of him. My mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, hands clasped, eyes darting between us. Megan sat rigidly in a chair against the wall, arms folded. I took a seat across from my father. He didn't waste time. "This has gone far enough," he said. I met his gaze evenly. I agree. His eyes narrowed. "Then you'll cooperate." I felt the familiar pressure of that word settle into the room. "Define cooperate," I said. He inhaled sharply. "You've created unnecessary complications. Legal reviews, oversight, people asking questions that don't need to be asked. Those questions existed before I spoke," I replied. "You just didn't expect them to reach you. This family has always handled things internally," he snapped. And internally, I said calmly, "You benefited from my silence." My mother flinched. "This isn't how we raised you," she said softly. "No," I replied. "You raised me to adapt." My father pushed a document across the table toward me. It was an agreement, typed, formal, carefully worded. "We're prepared to acknowledge your contributions," he said, "privately. In exchange, you'll step back. No more involvement with the trust. No more communication with auditors. We put this behind us." There it was. Recognition offered as currency. "I'm not interested," I said. Megan stood abruptly. "Do you have any idea what this has done to us?" I looked at her. "Yes, I do." She paced the room. "Dad can't sleep. Mom's anxious all the time. People are talking." They talked before I said, just not about the right things. My father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" The sound echoed through the room, sharp and final. "You've always thought you were smarter than everyone else," he said. "You think this makes you righteous." I leaned forward slightly. "No," I said quietly. "I think this makes me finished." The room went still. "I'm done negotiating my worth," I continued. "I'm done absorbing consequences that aren't mine. And I'm done protecting a structure that only worked because I stayed invisible." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "What do you want from us?" I considered that carefully. "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." My father stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. "You can't just walk away," he said. "You're part of this family." "I am," I replied, "but not on your terms." I stood. I won't be signing anything I said, and I won't be coming to meetings like this again. Megan's voice cracked. So that's it. That's it, I said. As I reached the door, my father called out one last time. You're making a mistake, he said. You'll regret this. I turned back. I regretted staying silent, I said. I don't regret this. Outside, the air felt lighter. The sky stretched wide and clear above the familiar street, as if the world hadn't noticed the collapse of something I once thought was permanent. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No dramatic fallout, no public confrontation, just distance. My father stopped calling entirely. My mother sent one final message weeks later, carefully worded, heavy with unresolved emotion. I replied politely, briefly, boundaries held. Megan withdrew, not hostile, just absent. And me, I expanded. I took on a new project at work that required visibility and authority, the kind of role I had once declined because it might make family dynamics uncomfortable. I traveled. I spoke up. I stopped apologizing for competence. One evening, months later, I received an email from the trust's legal team. The review was complete. Oversight would remain. Controls were formalized. The system had corrected itself quietly and thoroughly. I closed my laptop and sat back, a slow exhale leaving my chest. This was never about revenge. Revenge is loud, temporary. This was about reclamation. About taking back years of minimized effort and misplaced guilt and deciding they no longer belonged to anyone else. As I turned off the lights that night and walked upstairs in my quiet, steady house, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Alignment. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time nothing inside me was arguing anymore. And that, I realized, was the real victory. By the time spring arrived, the family silence had hardened into something permanent. Not dramatic, not explosive, just absence. Birthdays passed with cards that arrived late or not at all. Group messages went quiet. Invitations stopped. The space where obligation used to live felt strangely clean, like a room after heavy furniture has been removed. I told myself I was fine. Most days I was. But grief doesn't announce itself. It waits. It shows up sideways in ordinary moments when your guard is down. It happened one afternoon at work. I was in a conference room with the operations team reviewing a proposal I had helped build from scratch, when the director nodded and said, "This wouldn't be possible without Allison's groundwork." The room murmured in agreement. I smiled, thanked them, took notes. Then my chest tightened unexpectedly, because praise still startled me. On the drive home, I realized something unsettling. I had spent so long being useful without recognition that being seen now felt almost unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable exactly, just new. That night, I dreamed about my grandmother. She was standing in her old kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window, her hands dusted with flour. She looked up at me and said, "I tried to make it easier for you." I woke with tears on my face. The next morning, Patrick called. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was careful. "It's not urgent, but it matters." "What is it?" I asked. "The trust review included a supplemental memo," he said, "written years ago, by your grandmother." I sat down slowly. "She anticipated mismanagement," Patrick continued, "and she anticipated silence. She included a clause that allowed for oversight if a beneficiary demonstrated a pattern of concealment tied to family pressure." My hands trembled slightly. She knew. She suspected, he said. And she documented concerns about how authority was distributed in the family. I closed my eyes. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. "She instructed that it only be disclosed if certain conditions were met," Patrick said. They were. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, staring at nothing. My grandmother had seen it. The imbalance, the way control disguised itself as care, the way silence was rewarded until it wasn't. She had left a lever and waited. That afternoon, Megan called again. I almost didn't answer, not out of anger, out of fatigue. But I did. "I need to talk to you," she said immediately. Her voice sounded different, less defensive, more raw. "Okay," I said. "I've been thinking about everything," she continued. "About Dad, about how things were growing up." I waited. "I don't know who I am without his expectations," she said, "and that scares me." I leaned back on the couch, the weight of her words settling in. "That makes sense," I said. "He made sure you never had to ask." She laughed softly. "And you always had to answer." "Yes," I replied. There was a pause. "I'm not calling to ask you to fix anything," she said. I needed you to know I see it now." I believed her. "That doesn't mean we go back," I said gently. "I know," she said. "I just didn't want to stay blind." We ended the call quietly. No promises, no reconciliation, just truth shared without demand. That night, I cooked dinner slowly, deliberately. I lit a candle for no reason other than wanting the room to feel warm. I realized then how much of my adult life had been shaped by anticipation, waiting for approval, waiting for the next request, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now there was nothing to wait for. And that was unsettling. A week later, my mother showed up at my door, unannounced. I opened it to find her standing there, purse clutched tightly, eyes tired. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. I stepped aside. She walked through my house quietly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, as if cataloging the life she had never really seen. "You did this alone," she said finally. "Yes," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Your father never understood that about you." "I know," I said. She sat down at the table, hands folded. "He's struggling," she said. "Not with money, with relevance." I didn't respond. "He thought authority was love," she continued, "and now he doesn't know who he is." I looked at her carefully. "That's not my work to do." She met my eyes. For the first time, she didn't argue. "I think I knew that," she said. "I just didn't want it to be true." We sat in silence for a while. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. The words landed gently. Too late to heal everything, early enough to matter. After she left, I stood at the door and breathed deeply. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was clear. The final shift came unexpectedly. An email from the Trust's legal counsel arrived one morning, brief and formal. The review had concluded. Oversight was permanent. Controls were codified. Authority redistributed. The system my father had built around assumption and silence no longer existed. I forwarded the email to Patrick with a single word: done. That evening, I walked through my neighborhood as the sun dipped low, painting the houses in warm light. Families were grilling. Kids rode bikes. Life moved forward without commentary. I realized then that revenge had never been the goal. Revenge keeps you tied to what hurt you. This was something else. This was release. I had taken back my voice, my resources, my time. I had let consequences land where they belonged. I had stepped out of a structure that required my diminishment to function. As I turned back toward my house keys cool in my hand, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief, authority. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself to be real. And I knew with a certainty that surprised me that whatever came next in my life would be built on choice, not obligation. For the first time, that felt like enough. The first sign that things were not over came quietly. No calls, no letters, no confrontation. Just a notification from Human Resources on a Tuesday morning, buried between calendar invites and system updates. Subject line: internal review follow-up. I stared at it longer than necessary before opening it. The message was brief, professional, and unsettling in its restraint. A compliance officer wanted to meet. Routine, informational, no cause for concern. That phrase again? No cause for concern had become the family motto for years. It was how everything serious was dismissed until it couldn't be ignored anymore. I scheduled the meeting for that afternoon. The compliance office sat on the quiet side of the building, away from the glass walls and open-plan confidence of the executive floor. No windows, neutral art. 2 chairs positioned carefully across from a small table, not close enough to feel collaborative, not far enough to feel hostile. The woman who greeted me was younger than I expected. Calm, prepared. Her posture told me she already knew the answers to the questions she was about to ask. "This is not an investigation," she said first. "It's a clarification." I nodded. "Of course." She slid a document across the table. It was a disclosure. Not mine, my father's. Filed months earlier, quietly under a subsidiary he partially controlled through the family trust. He had listed me as a potential conflict of interest. I felt something cold move through my chest. He claimed, she continued, that your position here could influence decisions affecting trust-adjacent assets. I almost smiled. "He never understood what I do," I said calmly. She met my gaze. "We know." The relief I felt was immediate but contained. I had learned not to celebrate too early. "We're obligated to verify," she said. "But there's something else." She turned another page. "There were discrepancies," she said carefully, "between the disclosures and actual control." I leaned forward. "Can you be more specific?" I asked. She nodded. "Your father claimed indirect authority over assets he does not legally manage." There it was. The old habit resurfacing. Control asserted after it had already been stripped away. "He tried to use me as leverage," I said. "Yes," she replied, "and it backfired." The meeting ended with assurances, documentation, and one sentence that stayed with me long after I left the room. Sometimes, she said, people reveal more than they intend when they're trying to protect power. That night, I didn't call anyone. I didn't need to. The next move came from Megan. She showed up at my door unexpectedly, eyes rimmed, red shoulders, tense like she had been holding herself upright by force alone. "I didn't know he did that," she said as soon as I let her in. I closed the door quietly behind her. He's panicking, she continued. The trust, the oversight. Now this. I didn't respond. He thinks you're dismantling him, she said. I'm not, I replied. I stopped holding him together. She sank onto the couch, hands twisting in her lap. He doesn't know who he is without control. I thought of the compliance document, the reach for relevance, the attempt to pull me back into the structure he understood. He made his choices, I said. Megan nodded slowly. I know. I don't know where that leaves me. I sat across from her. It leaves you free, I said. But freedom is quiet. It doesn't tell you what to do next. She swallowed hard. I don't know how to disappoint him without feeling like I'm disappearing, she admitted. I softened slightly. You don't disappear by saying no. You disappear by never saying yes to yourself. She looked up at me, then really looked. You always knew, she said. No, I replied, I learned. She stayed for a while. We talked about neutral things, work, weather, the kind of conversation that doesn't ask for anything. When she left, she hugged me tightly. I don't think I'll ever be who he wanted, she said quietly. That doesn't mean you failed, I replied. It means the plan was wrong. After she left, I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, thinking about patterns. Control didn't vanish when challenged. It adapted. A week later, the final shoe dropped. Not from my family, from the trust. Patrick called early, his voice unusually firm. He's been removed, he said. I closed my eyes. From what I asked, though, I already knew. Any advisory influence, he replied. The board reviewed his conduct, the misrepresentation, the attempt to implicate you. They voted unanimously. I exhaled slowly. There's more, Patrick added. He contested it. Of course he did. He argued that as patriarch, he had implicit authority. I let out a short, humorless laugh. And they told him authority isn't inherited, Patrick said. It's documented. Silence stretched between us. He asked about you, Patrick said finally. What did you say? That you declined involvement. I smiled faintly. That was the right answer. When the call ended, I stood and walked through my house, slowly grounding myself in physical space. The counter I'd installed, the lamp I'd chosen, the quiet hum of a life that belonged to me. This wasn't victory. Victory implies conquest. This was consequence. The following Sunday, my mother called. Her voice was fragile. He's not well, she said. I'm sorry, I replied. She paused. That's all you have to say. I chose my words carefully. I can care without re-entering the cycle, I said. She sighed. I wish I had learned that earlier. So do I said gently. After we hung up, I sat on my porch and watched the afternoon fade into evening. Neighbors walked dogs. Someone laughed down the block. Ordinary life unfolded indifferent to family collapse. And I realized something else. For the first time, my father was facing something he had always avoided. A system that didn't bend because of his certainty. A room where his voice didn't command silence. A world that did not reorganize itself around his expectations. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt closure approaching, slow and deliberate. Not because he finally understood, but because I no longer needed him to. As darkness settled and porch lights flickered on, I went inside and locked the door behind me. Whatever storms he was facing now were no longer mine to manage. And that knowledge, steady and unshakable, felt like the final shift before something new began. The quiet after a collapse can be misleading. For weeks after Patrick's call, nothing happened. No new messages, no legal notices, no family emergencies engineered to pull me back into orbit. The silence felt intentional, like the pause before someone decides which story they want to tell about what just happened. I kept living my life. Work accelerated. The project I'd taken on expanded faster than expected, pulling me into rooms I'd once been adjacent to but never centered in. Decisions moved quickly. My name appeared on agendas without qualifiers. I noticed how little energy I spent bracing, now that I wasn't managing anyone else's reactions. Still, something itched at the edge of my awareness. Control doesn't dissolve overnight. It looks for another shape. The call came on a Thursday evening. A block number. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. There was a pause, then my father's voice, lower than I remembered, stripped of its usual authority. I need to talk to you, he said. My instinct was to hang up. Instead, I sat down. You're talking, I replied. He exhaled sharply. They've frozen my access. The board, the bank, everything. I know, I said. You orchestrated this, he said. No, I corrected. You exposed it. Silence. They're questioning decisions from years ago, he continued, asking for explanations, context. That tends to happen when records are reviewed, I said. His voice tightened. You could help clarify. There it was. The last reach. I won't, I said. You're my daughter. He snapped the old tone, trying to reassert itself. I'm an adult, I replied, and you taught me that actions have consequences. A bitter laugh escaped him. You always did twist my words. No, I said calmly. I finally understood them. Another pause, longer this time. I built this family, he said. I made sacrifices. I don't doubt that I replied. But sacrifice doesn't entitle you to ownership. His breathing grew uneven. If you don't help, this will ruin me. I closed my eyes briefly. This won't ruin you, I said. It will define you. I hung up before he could respond. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Not because of guilt, because of clarity. He wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing the narrative. The following week, an unexpected email arrived from the Trust's historical accounting firm. A new audit layer had been approved, expanded scope. Decades, not years. Patrick called shortly after. This wasn't part of the original review, he said. Someone pushed for it. Who, I asked. He hesitated. Your grandmother's executor. I sat back slowly. She anticipated escalation, Patrick continued, and she left instructions for what to do if oversight revealed obstruction. What kind of obstruction, I asked. Asset reallocation, he said carefully, disguised as family support. My pulse quickened. She thought funds may have been diverted under the pretense of helping Megan, he added, but without proper documentation. I thought back to every conversation about timing, about waiting, about resources being tight whenever I asked for anything. So he wasn't just controlling, I said quietly. He was compensating. Yes, Patrick said, and now the trail is being followed. The truth landed heavily. This wasn't about favoritism alone. It was about fear. Fear that the investment wouldn't pay off. Fear that he'd bet wrong. Fear that the narrative of sacrifice would collapse if the returns didn't materialize. Fear that required someone else to stay small to justify it. Megan called me that night. Her voice was tight, controlled. Did you know? I suspected, I said honestly. I didn't have proof. They're asking me questions, she said, about expenses, trips, coaching, things Dad insisted were necessary. Answer honestly, I said. She exhaled shakily. What if it makes him look worse? That's not your responsibility, I replied. There was a long pause. He told me everything was for me, she said, that I was the reason. I chose my words carefully. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said, and pressure isn't a gift. Her voice broke. I never asked for any of it. I know, I said. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Pity, not for him. For the cost of building a life around someone else's expectations. The final twist came from work. An internal announcement circulated quietly. A leadership restructuring tied to ethics compliance. A new external advisory seat opened. My name was listed as interim. I stared at the email, stunned. This wasn't revenge. This was reversal. The very systems my father tried to manipulate had elevated me because I refused to. That night, I stood in my kitchen, lights dim, city noise, faint beyond the windows. I thought about how many years I'd been told to wait, to be patient, to let someone else go first. Turns out the order had never been fixed. It had just been enforced. I poured myself a glass of water and raised it slightly, not in celebration, but acknowledgement. This wasn't about winning. It was about alignment finally catching up with truth. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for what came next. I was ready for it. The hearing was not dramatic. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no moment where everything exploded at once. It was worse than that. It was quiet, methodical, and irreversible. The audit findings were presented over 2 days in a windowless conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer toner. I was not required to attend, but Patrick suggested I be available. Not to speak, just to observe if I wanted. I chose to be there. My father sat at the far end of the table, shoulders hunched in a way I had never seen before. The man who once filled rooms with certainty now looked smaller, diminished by the absence of deference. He wore the same dark suit he always wore to important meetings, but it hung differently on him now, as if it no longer fit the role he believed he still occupied. The auditors spoke in neutral tones, presenting timelines, transactions, reallocations. Words like misclassification and discretionary movement replaced the language of sacrifice and support he had relied on for years. They didn't accuse him of cruelty. They didn't need to. They showed patterns. Funds labeled as educational support routed through shell accounts. Expenses approved without secondary authorization. Documentation retroactively adjusted to justify decisions already made. The room did not react emotionally. That was the point. Emotion had always been his shield. Numbers stripped it away. At one point, one of the auditors paused and asked him a simple question. Can you explain why these funds were redirected without disclosure? My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around the room, searching for something familiar. Agreement. Deference. Someone to step in and soften the moment. No one did. I was protecting the family, he said finally. The auditor nodded once. That intent does not align with the documentation. It was the closest thing to a verdict he would hear that day. During a break, I stood by the coffee station staring into a paper cup I had no intention of drinking. Megan joined me quietly. They never told me the numbers, she said. I didn't know. I believe you, I replied. She hugged herself tightly. I feel like my whole life was built on pressure I didn't ask for. That's not your fault, I said. She nodded but didn't look convinced. When the sessions concluded, Patrick pulled me aside. This is moving beyond internal correction, he said. There may be formal consequences. I nodded. I expected that. What you didn't expect, he added, is that you'll be asked to testify if it escalates. The word testify landed heavily. I'm not seeking punishment, I said. I know, Patrick replied, but accountability doesn't require intent. That night my father called again. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this was the last time. You didn't have to be there, he said. I know, I replied. You wanted to see me fall? No, I said quietly. I wanted to see the truth without distortion. He scoffed weakly. You always thought you were morally superior. I took a slow breath. I thought I was expendable, I said. You reinforced that belief every time you told me to wait. Silence stretched between us. They're talking about consequences, he said finally. Real ones. I know, I replied. You could still help, he said. Clarify. Contextualize. They trust you. I closed my eyes. I won't lie, I said, and I won't intervene. His voice cracked just slightly. I did everything for this family. I responded evenly. You did everything for control. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness for a long time afterward, not shaking, not crying, just letting the finality settle. The next morning I received confirmation. The trust board voted to remove my father entirely. Advisory, consultative, ceremonial. All roles dissolved. There would be penalties, possibly more. My involvement ended there. I went to work as usual. Answered emails, led meetings, made decisions that affected real outcomes. No one there treated me differently because of what was happening in my personal life, and that oddly grounded me. At lunch, I sat alone and realized something profound. I was no longer angry. Anger requires engagement. I had disengaged. That evening, my mother came over. She looked older than I remembered, not just tired, resigned. He doesn't know what to do, she said. He keeps saying this wasn't how it was supposed to end. I met her gaze. Endings rarely follow the plan. She sat down heavily. I enabled him. Yes, I said gently. She nodded, tears welling. I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. It usually does, I said, until it doesn't. She wiped her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not offering absolution, I replied. I'm offering distance. She looked at me, then really looked. And for the first time, I saw something close to understanding. As she left, she paused at the door. You're stronger than I ever was. I considered that. No, I said, I just stopped confusing endurance with virtue. Later that night, I sat on my porch and watched the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. Life continued in small, ordinary ways. Somewhere behind me, an old structure had collapsed, and instead of debris, it left space. Space to choose, space to breathe, space to become someone who no longer needed to be proven. Tomorrow would bring the final chapter. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was. The letter arrived 6 weeks later. Certified, return receipt requested. Heavy paper again, like weight was supposed to substitute for meaning. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. The same careful, controlled script he used for contracts and formal notes, the kind meant to look steady, even when the hand behind it was not. I did not open it right away. I set it on the table and made myself coffee. I stood by the window while it brewed, watching a neighbor load groceries into her car, the ordinary choreography of a life that did not know my name or my history or what it had cost me to stand where I was standing now. That felt important. When I finally opened the envelope, there was no apology. There was an explanation. He wrote about intent, about pressure, about responsibility, about how every decision he made had been for the greater good, even if the execution had been flawed. He wrote about feeling misunderstood, about being judged by systems that did not understand family loyalty. He wrote that he hoped one day I would see that his actions had come from fear, not malice. At the bottom of the page, he wrote that he loved me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. I did not cry, not because it did not hurt, but because I had already mourned the version of him who might have written something different. Love without accountability is not repair. It is preservation of harm. I did not respond. That choice surprised even me. Weeks earlier, I would have felt compelled to acknowledge it, to soften the silence, to reassure him that I understood. But understanding no longer required engagement. I could see his fear clearly now without needing to carry it. That was the final boundary. Life moved forward in small, steady ways. The interim role at work became permanent. Not because of politics or optics, but because results followed clarity. I built teams that operated on transparency, not assumption. I asked questions I had once been trained not to ask. I noticed how often people mistook my calm for compliance and corrected them gently, firmly. Megan and I met for coffee one afternoon, months after everything settled. She looked different, lighter somehow. Not happier exactly, but less tightly wound. "I started therapy," she said, stirring her cup. "For me, not to fix anything." I smiled. "That matters." She nodded. "I'm starting over, slowly." I'm glad I said and meant it. We talked about neutral things after that. Books, travel, work. The conversation didn't orbit our father. It didn't need to. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. "Thank you," she said, "for not rescuing me." I understood what she meant. Rescue keeps the system intact. Choice dismantles it. My mother called occasionally. Polite, measured. No expectations stated, but still hovering beneath the surface. I kept the conversations brief, kind but contained. She was learning slowly that access was no longer automatic. I didn't explain myself. Boundaries don't require footnotes. One evening, close to a year after the Christmas dinner that had started everything, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Friends from work, a neighbor, people who knew me not as someone's daughter, not as a problem to be managed, but as a person in her own right. At one point, someone commented on how calm the space felt. "It's intentional," I said. Later, after everyone left, I stood alone in the quiet dishes drying in the rack lights low. I thought about the girl I had been at 25, at 30, believing that patience was a virtue that would eventually be rewarded. I understood now that patience without agency is just waiting to be diminished. The revenge, if anyone wanted to call it that, was not the collapse of my father's authority or the exposure of his decisions. Those were outcomes, not goals. The real revenge was this. I stopped playing the role that made his version of the world possible. I lived well without asking permission. I chose clarity over compliance. I let consequences land where they belonged without cushioning the fall. And in doing so, I broke a pattern that had existed long before I knew how to name it. That night, before going to bed, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. Not critically, honestly. I saw someone who had learned that dignity is not something you earn by enduring mistreatment. It is something you protect by refusing it. I turned off the light and walked upstairs, my footsteps steady on the stairs I had paid for in the house I had chosen, in the life I had built without bargaining my self-respect away. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not disloyal for choosing yourself. You are not selfish for stepping out of a system that only works when you stay small. And you do not owe anyone your silence to keep their comfort intact. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is not retaliation. It is walking away whole. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from and what boundaries have changed your life. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about truth, accountability, and reclaiming your worth, don't forget to like and subscribe. This chapter ends here, but the life it made room for is just beginning.